Hi, I'm Dan.
I'm Olga.
And today we are discussing Season 1 of Amazon Prime's The Wilds. Walking on the wild side.
Having a wild time.
And you know what's going to be extra wild is it's full spoilers as we talk about the season as a whole.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So we binged this whole show in a day, which now is a few days ago. So bear with us if we vaguely forgot a few things. But
whoops.
But we did do, some backtracking as we made our outline.
Yes, we rewatched some scenes. We read some articles.
Mm-hmm.
We reviewed the characters' names because some things didn't stick because we engaged in unhealthy binging behavior.
Well, at the end of it, I was just like, my brain is broke. But we watched it all in a day, which means we had fun.
Mm-hmm.
And this was a show that was suggested to us by a few people, and I'm glad we checked it out.
Yeah.
What did you think overall?
I enjoyed it overall. Yeah. Clearly, I wanted to keep watching it. Yeah. It had a rough start. We'll get to that.
Yeah.
But there was enough there to grip me. And, the characters really were the highlight.
Mm-hmm.
And, the entire point of the show, I think.
Yeah.
And there was enough there to get me really engaged with them.
Yeah. I love the trope of Lord of the Flies meets something new, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's very much what this show is. And I had a lot of fun with it. I'm so glad it has a season 2 already. That was one of the reasons I decided to actually check the show out, is I was like, oh, it's already been renewed? Okay, I won't be wasting my time again.
Exactly.
Because God knows how many one-season shows we've reviewed on this channel right now.
Looking at you, Netflix.
Yeah.
Looking at you.
So, yeah, I had a lot of fun with it. I think that it's a flawed show, but a really enjoyable show that has a lot of potential. And I think there are awesome moments, and I think there were some clunky moments. Mm-hmm. But to me, it airs on, it's a good show with a few problems, as opposed to, like, when I started it, I thought maybe it'd just be like a guilty pleasure show.
Yeah.
So, yeah, there's definitely good stuff here.
I think it's the kind of show that viewers of our channel and listeners to our podcast would definitely like, which is why I think it was recommended to us by our audience. It's not the kind of show I would just recommend to my general group of friends or family.
Unless you knew they had a particular interest.
Well, that's what I mean. Yeah. I don't really have friends or family that would be into a show like this unless there was something super A+ about it. And unfortunately, it's not quite there enough for I think a general viewing audience, but for people who like this sort of young adult focused entertainment that
with sci-fi elements,
with sci-fi thriller elements. It's not sci-fi. I don't know why you said that.
Because anything where there's people doing an experiment and walking people, I automatically think sci-fi. But you're right, it's not.
No.
It's grounded in current sci.
Yeah.
Without the fi.
It is more of a thriller mystery than it is science fiction.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, I think if there are people who like young adult science fiction, they would still like this show.
Yeah, and this show has it nails what it needs to nail, which is the cast and the characters. And there's some messiness around plot and things like that and structure, but what the core of what a show needs to be, it has. And so let's start off. We're going to talk about our highlights first, and then we're going to go into some more of our criticisms. And our first highlight is these characters, their bonds. I think they do a great job of having them feel like they're becoming a family while consistently creating conflict and different pockets of conflict between different people. I think 8 people is a great number.
It's perfect in my opinion. It's enough to keep there being interesting interactions, to have new characters going off to the side with each other and every few episodes, but nonetheless you're not overwhelmed by who's that person, what are they, you catch on pretty quickly, I think.
And it makes it, because you're able to keep track of everybody, it really does feel like a family forming, right? A group. I don't know if you want to say family.
I don't actually think family is where we're at in season 1. I think that's more of a season 2 thing.
A community.
Yes, a community, a friendship, group, a team.
Yeah.
They really feel like a team. You still have your tensions. You still have people who one week are bickering and other people who seem cool. Next week, it's a little, I say next week. It's not. It takes place over the course of seemingly a month.
Yeah.
But Nonetheless, it just makes sense. It's how teenage girls are, young adults are. Yep. I don't know. I liked it.
Yeah. So, any particular characters that stood out to you?
Thatton is really great. Dot, I love.
Yep.
Marty/Martha.
Yep.
Tony, I like, even though I don't relate to her a whole lot, I still think that her episode was really
well done.
Good, and that everything that she had after that and her interactions with people, she started off a little rocky and it made sense later.
Yeah.
I don't know, even the twins, Rachel and Nora, even though they're not like my personal favorites, again, I don't like connect with them, but I like watching them. Honestly, I mean, that's the thing. I don't have to connect with, I don't really connect emotionally with like any of them. Yeah. I just sympathize with them. I get where they're coming from. So honestly, I don't really feel like there's like just a bad one in the bunch.
There are ones where I can see certain individuals disliking them.
Yeah.
But I don't think there's like, first of all, I think Dot is fucking awesome.
Yeah, she's the best one.
I love her flashbacks. Tony, I personally did relate to quite a bit. I think Tony's really great. We didn't even mention Shelby. I think her flashback was, I mean, there's so many great episodes. To me, Nora is like on the end of the weak link, but the actress is good enough that I still like find sympathy within that. And I think Leah is a like highs and lows character. Like
she had her work cut out for her, and therefore I still haven't figured out how I feel about her. But I don't want to say I dislike her, because even when she's not the focus of an episode, I think she plays a really good supporting cast member.
Well, I think this is definitely the show where some people will be like, I hate the protagonist, and I don't think everyone's gonna.
Right.
But I think there are gonna be people who are like, I like everybody else. I don't really watch for Leah.
Yeah.
But it's
divisive.
Yeah, but it switches perspective-ish every episode, so that certainly helps. Next up, let's talk about the production value. I think that's definitely a highlight for us. It doesn't feel like a cheap show.
No.
And I think the cinematography is well done. They're filming in New Zealand. I think that the where they are really adds to the show. Yeah. And the Dawn of Eve's like locations feels grounded enough, right? I don't feel like I'm in some sci-fi thing, but like I like the weird tunnels and stuff that we see in the present day.
It's like a metal bunker. I don't know, it's not necessarily a place I've been or see very much, but nonetheless it's not like confusing that it would exist. It feels very much like part office building, part underground lair, which is what you would expect from like a mysterious organization. We have pop culture touchstones for this, I guess.
And I think that they do a pretty good job of cutting around the various stunts and things they have to do. I mean, you have stuff like the shark at the very end, which felt a little silly, but like they showed it as little as they possibly could, right? So
that's fine. We'll see if they have maybe more budget in season 2 to actually, if they pick up right there to demonstrate it.
Definitely. So I mentioned some of the stuff I really liked were the flashbacks, and I think that a lot of the flashback episodes were the highlight of the show. What stood out to you?
I mean, like you said, Dot, her story, I think, is going to be very relatable to people. It's very just her struggles of kind of being like the kid put in the position of the parent. They were probably my favorite with Shelby's. But at the same time, I just feel like the reason that they work is because it humanizes the characters outside of their like perilous circumstances. It actually lets you know why they are acting the way they are now, what got them there. It's very Lost-like. I mean, the flashbacks were one of the best parts of Lost too, and I think that's totally okay to borrow from that. It's one of the best parts of The 100 in the early seasons too. It just
the flashback device, the character-centric episode with flashbacks formula works, and I think they are handling it very well. I'm interested to see what happens in season 2 when they have to go back and do multiple flashbacks for some of these characters, because some of them I'm like, okay, like that's your story, like, that's your big thing. So what else is there?
Or you can just fill in the blanks without actually needing to see it. Like, you don't need to see every single moment. Like, we don't need to see them on the shuttle on the way to the plane, you know, like that kind of thing. I don't personally feel the need for something along those lines.
That said, I mean, the one person we saw 2 times was Leah, and I think that they did a good job with her second flashback, adding layers to that and adding to her issues and showing the accident and showing stuff with the friend and all that and fleshing that out. I thought that was well done. I think that each episode, like we said, the 8 people is great, and each episode helps you focus on each of them, see that each of them is worth caring about. And I think you mentioned Fatin at the beginning, and she's one of those characters that at the beginning especially very easy to dislike. It's like an archetype that's not very likable.
They're like making you dislike her. You know, she is the odd one out repeatedly in their group, and you as a viewer, I think, are supposed to side with the survivor, you know, the survival instinct.
And the thing is, I mean, I think her flashbacks were good, but I think that honestly on the island is where they really got me on board with her. Because she started, she's just funny. Like she has like the Sawyer lines, right? And like she's funny. The actress is good. She started being more of a friend to multiple different people, and they just weren't like drawing attention to her lack of effort as much, and that made it easier to like her. She was just, that actor probably had the most like. I'm not saying her part was easy. I'm saying that she was like the most relaxed almost. And I don't mean because she was chilling. I just, how do I put this? It just, she was that character. Like, it didn't really feel like watching someone play a part, which sometimes I felt like I could see some people like, I'm reading these lines dramatically. I'm in this situation. She was just very genuine, even when she was being a bit of a bitch. Like, it was just like, fun to watch. I think to me Dot felt very similar.
Which is why their like connection and friendship was really nice.
And another highlight for me, it does again can go off of this cast and everything, which is the diversity both of race, of background, and of body types. Because we are getting this group of 8 women, just women, and having a variety of body types, not having it be all models and all white women.
I think it was important. You know, you have even their class divides and it plays a part, like their class separation, their race separations being important to their history, to their background, and with how they interact with each other. But even as a viewer, again, you have someone to connect with more, or maybe even see a story you haven't seen before or heard of before. And that's important too, especially when it's aimed at young adults.
I'm honestly, as sort of a side note, I'm surprised that at least so far, only 2 of them are into women. Given that there are 8 of them, guess that if you want to have a lot of romances in the show, which I would assume they would, I would have assumed that like maybe at least there's one bi person, or you know, I would have thought at least 3 of them. But obviously, who knows? Maybe that will shift.
That could, it's just one of those things where they're like not exploring that now. Doesn't mean that they won't later on. I don't think that they could add that without having it be an 11th hour revelation too. Like, it wouldn't feel out of place to have someone's, you know, sexuality become more relevant later. And that's fine. I'm okay with there not being like a love triangle in this season.
I don't disagree with that.
They got close to that with like a friendship triangle, and I feel like that was a lot more interesting than a love triangle.
I think it was interesting because it was kind of both, because we didn't really know everyone involved sexuality. So obviously we knew Tony, but we didn't really because it wasn't clear if there was a love thing going on or if it was just friendship. And I think that
between her and Marty, and
Shelby. So I think that was all handled very well.
It was.
So we talked a lot about the core 8 people, but we also have these villains or antagonists.
I mean, they're pretty villainous in what they're. I'm fine with calling them villains.
And I think that they did a good job with them. I think it took me a little bit to get on board with Gretchen. Obviously, even as a villain is what I mean. I think, but I think that especially the episode where she was in the mental hospital was very well done. I think she is an intelligent villain with a goal that I understand, and her like psychosis growing and stuff. She sort of embodies a lot of the various themes going on.
Yeah, I mean, one of the best aspects a villain can have is their ego. And my God, her ego it's impressive with her hubris, and she's like gross, but also, I don't know. She's how do I put it? She's very masculine, of like in the sense of feeling confident enough to pull the strings of these people, and her assuredness that what she's doing is right and just and like warranted, and how dare anyone stand in my way? It's so like stomach. I was like, I hate that she's doing this. How dare she? And I'm like, I wonder if I'd be this disgusted if it was a male villain doing this, or if I'd be like, yeah, of course, I think they can pull all the strings. But it just grips me harder that she's doing this to these girls, and that's what makes her so intriguing. I don't feel like I'm sympathetic to her.
Well, and I also think she's fascinating because she has moments where she's like, what, you think I would kill someone? And I'm like, I really don't know. Like, yeah, I mean, you haven't shown us that you're willing to do that, but maybe you are.
Maybe you could. I don't know. I guess if we're talking about villains, you have the rest of her group.
Well, I want to just quickly say, I also think Jeanette, her episode with Gretchen, the flashbacks, really helped Gretchen a lot too, because I really did feel like she cared about Jeanette.
Yeah. I love that thing I was going to say, in the group of Jeanette being like, a proto Gretchen. Yeah. But at the same time, Gretchen is using her, and she resents her for dying and getting hurt. Because like, how could you complicate my plan to make my life harder? I trusted you. I liked you. Yeah. How stupid are you? Like,
I think that's in there, but there's also nuance stuff she actually cares about.
But that's what I mean. It's nuanced in their actual having a relationship. In Jeanette, oh God, what they did with Jeanette, it was so sad that she has so limited time, because I really like that character. Yeah. But the fact that they kind of played with us and with the timeline with flashbacks to give us more Jeanette, I think it really came at a good time, because Gretchen's character needed it by that point.
I agree. Yeah. So I assume you were about to bring up the investigators.
Yes. Yeah.
So
Dean and David, I believe. Yes.
So the psychologist that specifically talked to Leah alone that one episode, I think that's one of the best sequences, I guess I'll say. I was going to say like scenes, but it's multiple. Yeah. Sequences in the show so far. Yeah. It was very fucked up.
So hard to watch.
And he was very good at what he was
gaslighting
doing.
Her. He was incredible at gaslighting her. And it helped, I feel bad saying this, but it helped a lot to make Leah more sympathetic. Because again, I don't necessarily feel like, at least we jive very well with her in the premiere. And therefore, they kind of needed to make some
strides.
To improve our relationship.
Well, and I think it also wasn't one of those scenes that really proved the actress's ability.
Absolutely.
Too, so,
yes. Yeah.
All right, and so the next thing I want to talk about before we go into our critiques is the themes of mental health discussions that this show has. Because, at first I was like, oh, it's just like a Leah thing. But as you go through the various characters, it becomes like very clear that mental health and mental triggers
anguish
and PTSD and all that sort of stuff is a big part of the show.
If it was just baseline, every single one of these young women should be in therapy prior to this. Like, just everyone has in general, lots of people should be in therapy, but they all have issues that they should have counseling for.
Yeah. But I think especially when you look at like what happened with Shelby's friend, when you look at Tony's anger issues, when you look at Marty's the assault that she dealt with, same thing with Jeanette. There's just a lot of stuff here, and and a lot of it is tied to also the gender politics and how the men leave this destruction in their wake.
But also not just men, because Rachel's story with her disordered eating and her view of her body, it is a female coach who's encouraging. It's like society's and athletes' pressures. And you could say, well, that is also patriarchal, but it is in her case a little bit different too.
Complex.
Yeah, it's more complex than
yeah,
that.
Yeah. I think that I appreciate them delving into all this. And I appreciate that in general, this is a show that's more than just about like, oh, it's fun, whatever, like I appreciate that
drama on an island.
Yeah. Like I appreciate that it's trying to say some things both about gender and about mental health. Do I think that it hits the nail on the head all the time? No.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think this in some ways can be a good segue into one of our critiques about this is a show about gender politics.
Mm-hmm.
And like, we're not putting that on the show. That is the show. Like,
that is its thesis.
Yeah. And I think that for me, having a show that's discussing gender politics in 2020 and not including any sort of discussion of gender identity, not having any trans individuals
or non-binary,
anything like that, it feels antiquated.
Yes.
So even though, yes, I think that there's discussions to be had about the patriarchy and about, where it's such a difficult talk now to even be like, what are the differences between men and women?
Yeah.
I see what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
I do think
it's not enough.
Yeah.
I mean, in a way that kind of enhances Gretchen's like villainesque status is for her to just be like, we need a gyno utopia, and even phrase it and think about it in the terms of biological sex is not enough. It is antiquated. It is turfy. Trans exclusionary radical feminism. That is kind of, without talking, by having her not talk about it, she is exhibiting it.
Yeah.
Because her mind just can't see beyond like what men have wrought on society, what society has wrought on men, and therefore women really being lost in it. It's like, well, what about people who don't fit into those, two extremes? So I hope we see that discussed in season 2, because by not even mentioning that she's not doing it, the show accidentally enforces it.
Yeah, I mean, because the thing is complicated about it is that it's only really through Gretchen that we're getting that theme.
Yes.
Right? Like, it's not like the people around, our people on the island are like, we, believe women are better.
No men here?
They all kind of roll their eyes at this like feminist retreat they're going on and stuff, right? And so it's only through the eyes of Gretchen that we're getting a lot of these themes. And so, but the problem is, I don't know if the show is aware that she comes off kind of turfy, or if they're just like, or they just think, she's a radical feminist, but without they're not thinking about the
they themselves just don't want to deal with that. And I hope that if you've bitten this off, complete the narrative and kind of include that as a problem with her character or with her view.
Yeah. And if we're going to talk also about the mental health stuff, I want to talk about Leah, who I think is a really complicated character, right? And talking about her mental health, because they try to do this thing where her mental health like almost becomes like her superpower. Like it's good that she's obsessive and paranoid because she's in a situation where she should be obsessive and paranoid.
Yeah.
And so it's this weird thing where like that's what allows her to see beyond things. And I don't know, like they're certainly also showing the bad sides of her stuff.
Yes.
And I think she's a nuanced character, and she's a difficult character because even if I understand her issues, her constantly attacking people and jumping to conclusions, even if I know she has a reason to be paranoid, isn't a necessarily likable thing on a television show.
Especially when in world, on island, it doesn't make any sense for her to think that, really. Like, she doesn't.
Yes and no.
Yes and no, but she doesn't have as much evidence as she thinks she has until all of a sudden it's validated. This is the thing where I think I have a hard time with as a binge watcher, and having been a few days, I don't recall all of the things that
stood out to her.
Stood out to her, and how many of them would have made sense to stand out to her. But yeah, I mean, in a way, I think she is the most like one of the most relatable characters for a teen woman in the sense of trauma and heartbreak being like the thing that sets her adrift, and her kind of acting more mature than she's prepared to be, and that kind of thing. Like, I know people like this. They have been difficult to deal with, but they exist.
Well, I think so. That's the other thing that I think is difficult about her as a character is, at first blush, I'm like, oh, do I really want the main character of the show to just be like, her whole thing is she's obsessed with this guy? Like, that's not necessarily what I'm looking for. The fact that her obsession and her paranoia then transfer over to something else, I think helps a lot. And I think what they're doing with her is very interesting. And especially when we talk about the, like you said, the scene with the psychologist. Like, him like gaslighting her dealing with her guilt, but also being sort of right, but also having made mistakes. Like, I do think is, I don't know, she's interesting. But I think something we talked about off air was, on a TV show, being obsessive can make you one note. And I think that was one of the tough things to like about a character, as opposed to like a person who I feel sympathy for in real life, is a character having them have like being stuck on the same thing over and over again, not always great.
There's not a lot of, it's 2 steps forward or 1 step forward, 2 steps back with her sometimes. And then finally it's like, no, root for her. She's right. It's like, ugh. But I knew she was right a lot earlier, so... Well, or I suspected it a lot earlier, so this isn't really that much of a revelation to me, and she's been like this. She's a lot.
Well, let's talk about the lot earlier part now. So I think our other biggest, issue here is the structure of the show. Yeah. Because we start off right off the get-go knowing that they get off the island at some point, right? And that creates a situation that sometimes is interesting, where you're getting tidbits that you're like, ooh, where is that gonna go, or whatever. Like, you hear, oh, what happened to Nora, and you're like, oh, so now I'm like waiting to see what happened to Nora. At the same time, it a lot of times creates like the prequel problem, where I am like, Leah's falling off a cliff. Too bad I know that there's no reason to be worried about her right now. And that happens, like 7 times, whether between like Rachel going in the quicksand and I know she's okay. And
the one thing there is you wonder, is she going to lose her hand? When is Rachel going to lose her hand?
Yeah.
Like, when does this
But like, I wasn't worried about it happening during the quicksand.
Right.
So
fair enough.
It's, I don't know. I think that it created some interesting things where I was like, oh, why aren't we seeing Marty in the present? I don't know. I'm rambling.
No, you're right. That is the problem, where we're sitting here watching things be introduced in the present, and we're like, oh, when are they going to back explain them? And then sometimes they don't as well. And then you're like, was this really that big a mystery that we have to wait until season 2 to find out what happened to Shelby's ankle and why that's a big deal? Like, that's also kind of an issue. It also doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me why the flashbacks are happening to life before the island. Like, you have it set of the narrative of like, they're interviewing them about what happened on the island. I'm like, okay, but why am I also flashing to like them in high school?
They try to explain that by saying, oh, we want to know your background. How did you get on the plane to begin with? Yeah, but it's a little bit.
It doesn't really make sense. Yeah. And I'm okay with it because I like the flashbacks, but it doesn't.
Well, that's the other thing is I agree, because sometimes it's like, oh, this episode's narrated by so-and-so. Now let's cut over to a scene where they weren't there for that.
Yeah, they had no idea this thing happened.
Or like, oh, we're starting with a flashback of the person, then we get out of them narrating, and now we're over here. Like, it creates, sometimes it creates this weird stuff. And I do appreciate that they didn't always stick specifically to, we have to do an interview every single episode.
Yeah. Especially as the season went on.
Yeah. But I think that for me, the biggest issue was how I felt like I was left so flat at the end of the season, because when you start the season with me already knowing they get off the island, I expect that at the end of the season they get off the island.
Yeah.
I expect you to catch up.
Yes.
I don't, and maybe that was on me. I don't know, but
I don't think it's that weird of an expectation.
Yeah.
I expected it as well.
Yeah.
And I think that that's just kind of it. This doesn't feel like avant-garde storytelling enough for it to not catch up at the end, if that makes sense.
Well, I mean, to me, the other issue is that I think because I know they get off the island from the beginning, from literally the first episode, I'm thinking, okay, so what is the show after they get off the island? And so now we're in season 2, and I still don't know that answer. You know, like, and I'm like, because I'm like, once they get off the island and it's not just about them surviving on the island, I don't know if I care about the show anymore, because what I care about is the 8 of them surviving on the island.
Well, I think that they are doing that with the introduction of the Twilight of Adam. It will become I guess, a thing of taking down this organization, taking down whatever system put them into danger, and also what, how to rescue those guys, I guess, too.
I guess. I mean, that was the question I had while we were watching before we got to the Twilight of Adam thing of, like, is season 2 going to introduce another set of 8 girls who are getting experimented on? Like, how much are we going to see the guys next season? Is there going to be guy-centric episodes? How many of them? So that's interesting to me, but I am worried because to me what you're explaining about, like, oh, they're gonna take down the organization, that's like always the bad part of the young adult novel. It's like, I watched The Hunger Games, that was good. Now when she's not in The Hunger Games and she's just taking down the bad guys, not as interesting. So
I don't disagree, but at the same time, like, it's the only logical way to keep them together. And working as a team. Yeah.
I guess what I'm saying is, if they didn't create this framing device where I know, like, basically I know so much about after they get off, then I would be like, oh, maybe we could have 3 seasons of them on the island. Right. And maybe we still could. I don't know. But, like, to me.
But that sounds a lot more exhausting when you know that they make it off.
Yeah, exactly. And you know how many of them survive.
Well,
you know a bunch of them survive.
A bunch of them survive.
Yeah. I mean, all of that said, for all we know, I'm like, okay, so it ends with the shark attack. Do they get attacked and then they get rescued? I mean, that was like left off in this weird spot where I'm like, oh, are they gonna go get them now because they were attacked by a shark? If they don't, that seems kind of crazy that they'd, like, continue to have that liability there,
especially since Leah does know Nora did something. So even if Nora, dies in that shark attack, between Rachel being injured and Leah being like, this is all a setup, you're messing with your experiment a little too far. Yeah.
I mean, I suppose that if Nora dies, then, or at least gets injured so much that they go in and save her, then no one will believe Leah, and then that can kind of connect back to Shelby leaving the note in the present of "you were right" or whatever she says, something like that. I don't know. I will say Leah in the present is definitely best Leah.
I agree. I agree. Oh God, her in the pilot. I don't think we talked about just how she was so pretentious. It was just the most, like, teen angst crap. Like, written by an adult teen angst crap that I just, for all the relatability I found and caught up with later, I was like, God, her narration is annoying.
I think that you're totally right. The dialogue from her, especially in the narration, I thought was it was very off-putting. That was the thing where I was like, this might just be a guilty pleasure, like, bad ABC Family show.
This show has nothing interesting to say. Look at all the tropes they're rehashing.
Like, how many times in the first episode is she basically like, being a teenager is the real hell.
Not like, being alone on an island facing environmental hazards. Like, I don't know about this.
I mean, like, you can, like, let us sort of see that that's part of your thesis by watching the episodes and seeing how tough things were before. But, like, it shouldn't be straight up said, the flashbacks are worse than the present. Because I don't even agree with you. So
eventually I feel like I agree.
I agree-ish. I mean, but like you said, it's like, this is a very traumatizing experience they're going through on the island. And I don't know. It's
yeah. And once they get off the island too.
I think what added to the issue was that this was present tense Leah talking about it. So it was supposed to be like, after all of her experiences on the island, this is who she still is. Like, it was one thing to see her as this teenage character before she hit the island, but to be like, oh, I guess the island really has no impact on her because she's still just talking about how she's obsessed with this guy. And then in the few episodes after that, in the present, they made her way better.
Yeah. She's great now.
Yeah. Like, it's almost honestly like incongruous. And like the fact that she wasn't being more inquisitive of them in that first episode
doesn't add up given where, they wrote that before other things were figured out, I think.
Yeah.
And
yeah. So didn't love the beginning. We personally thought the finale was lackluster.
It was a bit underwhelming.
Yeah. I think they had much better episodes than that one.
The problem was you set up the mystery of who's the other Confederate other than Jeanette.
Mm-hmm.
We figured out it was we highly suspected Nora from episode 4? Honestly, from episode 2, from her episode with Rachel.
Yeah.
So she was one of the, we were like, Dot is too obvious.
Yeah. I thought maybe Shelby, but then like Leah was too suspicious of her too early.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So to me, Nora, I was like, Nora, they're not actually giving anything for herself. It's all about Rachel. She makes the most sense.
Yep.
That said, like it's not that the reveal was the problem for me. Right. It really was that like, they treated it too much just like another episode of the show as opposed to the finale.
Yeah. I was far more interested in Leah's stuff in the present than I was in how Gretchen recruited Nora, which honestly didn't completely
work,
add up for me either.
Yeah. That's the thing. I was interested in Leah in the present. I was interested in Leah on the island, and I was not interested, like, even though, like, honestly, if it was a random episode, I liked her relationship with that guy.
Nora's.
Yeah. Like, I liked seeing that, but it felt like it was really taking up way too much time for a finale, And I don't think that it was a strong enough story to motivate her actions.
Mm-hmm.
And anything else that you're, like, hoping for in season 2?
I mean, we need to find out why Shelby shaved her head. Yes. What got Gretchen like so gung-ho about this that got her fired and excommunicated from the community.
Yeah. What's Dot's, like, what did Gretchen want from Dot?
Yeah, what was Gretchen's agreement with Dot's father?
Yeah.
Yeah, like, these are the most interesting things, and then we have the more obvious ones of what happened to Nora, what happened to Marty.
Yeah.
Something we didn't criticize that I still feel is worth talking about is what is Gretchen's, like, end game? How does she plan to like save this situation and get them to not sue her? I guess.
So I was trying to think about, like, person to person. It's like a bunch of them don't have a ton of money, so just paying them off. Okay. I mean, like, you could say that, like, Leah's pretty easy because they could just blackmail the guy that she likes. There's a few of them. But, like, the fact that they, like, had the detective, like, looking into ways to blackmail Marty, I'm like...
Afterwards?
Yeah, I'm like, wouldn't you have done that, like, before? Like, and she says, oh, well, we knew she was in a court case, so that's what part of the reason we picked her. I'm like, a court case? That's not enough.
Yeah. It didn't... Given all the other things that seem so figured out, that part didn't really work. I almost wish that they had framed the flashbacks to their current or to their lives prior to the crash as like, here's what we found in our research about them.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. We hacked their computers. We found this stuff.
Or even if phones. Like they more pointedly asked questions to show like, oh, what do like we know, like what do they already know about them, kind of thing.
We're harping on things a lot, but the thing is that the reason that we're nitpicking or finding these flaws is because there's enough to really like sink our teeth into and enjoy that the stuff that stands out for not being at that level is worth discussing in the hopes that they correct it and find a better balance in season 2.
Yeah. The characters are great. Love Tony and Shelby. Love, so many of the character dynamics. I really can't wait to see what happens with Shelby shaving her head.
Right.
But there's definitely things that I hope get better. So that's what we thought of the show. What did you think of season 1? What do you want for season 2? Let us know in the comments down below. And I hope you're doing okay.